jump in and get going here. Welcome to DAAN. We have a full slate here, and we're going to have Bob Martin from ETS is going to join us at 9. But to get started, let's just go over the agenda. So we're going to do welcome and introductions. And we do have some new faces. Somebody already noticed we have a new face from here from LACOE. We're going to do a little primer on building data culture, which is another piece that my unit is working on. My colleague Hillary Weissman will be giving an overview kind of by using an upcoming workshop that we have this week as to what that data literacy part of our accountability and data literacy unit title means. Then we'll get our assessment updates, some accountability updates, just a couple of legislative updates and some CalPads updates. Save that for last. I promise they won't be too overwhelming. And along the way, we'll have a couple of questions and then a couple polls and a survey. We're really trying to build our capacity to serve your needs. That's really what we are hoping to do, and we need your input to make that happen. So some quick introductions by way of the chat. I know we have a lot of new people this year just from getting the notification. So if you could drop in the chat. If you're new to DAAN this year, this is your first school year in DAAN. I know some of you came on late last year, but if you're new this year, introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your LEA name and your position that you're serving there. And you may have been at that LEA for a while, but you're new to DAAN. So just drop that in the chat so we can welcome all the new people to DAAN. What's kind of fun about these meetings is, oh, Lily, welcome Lily from Alhambra. I feel like the romper room whenever you do this. Ken Owens from Long Beach, thank you, Ken. Ooh, they're going fast. Gerald from Hacienda La Puente, welcome. Claudia from Hawthorne. Sarah, you're an old hand. I'm gonna pull you in later, but if you're new, wow. They're just pouring on here.
I see charters. I see assessment coordinators.
And you see, I think the data coordinators, what's really interesting about this role, hi David and Rennie from Pasadena, data facilitators. So, this is kind of the interesting nexus of all these different pieces. You've got the data and CalPads and that informs our assessment system, which informs the dashboard, and they're intertwined. If you don't have your data right, you don't get kids in the assessment system. If the data is not right coming out of the assessment system, your dashboard is messed up. So it's kind of a critical nexus. And I know when you're first new, it can be overwhelming. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have done in the past to facilitate more of a network. I know you've been probably a lot of you who are historically have been in DAAN for a while already chimed in, but let's just try again. If you're a veteran of DAAN, enter your LEA name if you've already done that. And how many years you've been with DAAN? Who's got the most years in DAAN as a member? Oh, Sherry, 8 years. Very good. Kevin Shalito, we go back a ways. I remember I met Kevin at a DAAN meeting. Hi, Carolyn. I see familiar names from previous districts. It's always good to see you here. Oh, look at Ruth. I think that might be the cake. And just Norma at Lennox, thank you for chiming in. Yeah, and just to give you a sense of why this is, everyone's new every year is what I like to say. Ruth Ruiz and I, Ruth from Pomona, and I just had a little problem-solving issue around the LPAC and CalPads and a fatal error because of a student's ELAS status. I know this is kind of CalPadian, but it took a lot of emails to get that resolved. And she's been around for a long time, so things come up every year that you haven't seen before because the systems are constantly changing. So I want to assure you, if you're new, that we are here to, oh, look at Tiffany, 12 years. We're here to really foster that kind of network and collaboration. We are a learning organization, and this is an area that we are constantly learning in. because like I said, things change and we are here to support you and to connect you with others. And I think that's one of the best parts about DAAN. And I've met a number of friends through DAAN that I continue to lean on when I have a question that I can't answer. So I encourage you to participate with DAAN and some of the upcoming events. So just one more thing to drop in here for everyone. In what way do you hope being part of DAAN can make your job a little easier this year? What would you like to get out of DAAN? Okay, Gerald, yeah, other resources. Eric, a puppy. I knew somebody. I put world peace in response to a question like this. You and I clearly think alike. Keeping on top of the CDE info. Yeah, CDE and assessment updates. Sure. Yeah. Accurate information to share with your educational partners. Great. Wow. Any new info? Resources, support systems. All right, yeah, keep them coming. We'll of course save this chat. This is really helpful to kind of inform us. And we are kind of shifting gears a little bit this year. We've had a little bit of a restructuring, and we are trying to be offer a little more, I guess I would say, this year. And I'll give you a little insights in a moment. But let me introduce you to the DAAN team first of all, before we go any farther. I'm Evan Bartelheim. I'm the project director for the Accountability and Data Literacy Unit, and I facilitate DAAN, but as you'll see, we have members from outside of DAAN routinely coming in, including from our Curriculum and Instructional Services division, to facilitate conversations around LPAC and the interim assessments and those things. And then we have people from outside the organization too. With me today, I've got Hillary Weissman, who's my coordinator in Accountability and Data Literacy. Hey, Hillary.
Good morning. Good morning.
Jaime Oliveros, who's our amazing data specialist here in the Accountability and Data Literacy Unit, and share some of his handiwork later. You get at least a screenshot. And then Margaret Sandoval, who's also the glue that holds us all together here in Accountability and Data Literacy. And right now, I'd like to introduce the newest member. I'm so excited. He's not only a new member to us at LACOE, he's a erstwhile DAAN member himself. Stephen Bartlett, and maybe you can, by way of introduction, tell us a little bit about your history.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Bartlett. It's an honor and privilege to be able to serve the LACOE community through DAAN, as a coordinator in assessment through Curriculum and Instructional Services, and I'm excited to be part of this team. It's an extraordinary team. I've benefited a lot from all of these meetings over the years as a LEA LPAC, LEA CASP, LEA CalPADS coordinator for Montebello Unified, and now here at LACOE having the opportunity to serve you. It's a real privilege. Thank you.
And Stephen is, he'll be a specialist. He actually still looking for one additional, but an assessment coordinator. And part of the reason that assessment, if you remember, Deb Atwell and Elise Yerke, they're still here at LACOE. They've just moved into different roles. And they were providing kind of specialized support around the assessments with Elise was our ELA, ELD specialist, and Stephen's filling that role. And then we're also hiring for a math and science assessment specialist. And their particular support will also include a lot of work around using the the interim assessment blocks to inform instruction. And they moved to curriculum instruction because really assessment works best when it's actually integrated in your annual plan. And I think any of you who've gone to any of Deb or Elise's workshops in the past can attest to that and the benefit that provides. And looking at the assessments in the context of informing instruction. And so that's a big part of why they're there, but they continue to be an integral part of DAAN and will always be at our meetings to provide updates. And I can just say from my perspective, I'm super relieved because it's really hard to keep up with all the stuff going on in the world of CASP and CAST and CalAlt and LPAC. And although it is part of, what we do here, there are a lot of changes. And so I really feel for everybody when you're at the district level. So welcome board. So just a quick review of the purpose of DAAN. So as many of you noted, what you want to get from DAAN is the timely updates to LEAs. and we have added data this year regarding data assessment and accountability. We throw that in, and as you'll see, data gets more and more core in the accuracy of your data and understanding the data elements and what informs the dashboard, and accountability becomes more important. So I always strive to provide that. Information, just a little caveat, it's current as of yesterday, as of maybe this morning at 12:30, but that's it's subject to change. As we all know from last year, if anything, we've all developed that neuroplasticity to adjust to changes, but things do change, and we'll always strive to keep you updated. And by the way, sometimes this is one of the challenges that we're faced with at the county level. And I know my colleague Bonnie McFarland in the state and federal program says it. The state has done a really exemplary job at trying to push out more information and having a lot of different mediums by which to communicate. And unfortunately, that means sometimes you hear the information before we do, because you're on the right meeting at the right time. You may have heard it before us. And so eventually we do all get caught up, I think. But if you've heard something and you have a clarification of something maybe you've heard and you say, that doesn't jive with what you're saying, please don't hesitate to let us know. And I see our role as being kind of the great aggregator, because I know it's hard to keep up with a million emails and the assessment spotlight and this listserv and that listserv. And if you don't get the information because you weren't at that meeting, it gets harder and harder to know it, and the year progresses on. So our goal is to kind of be the aggregator, and we do want your feedback, and we'll have a poll at the very end or a survey just to kind of close out. They'll ask you what your preferred mediums are, but yeah, we do want to help you kind of get all the sources in one place. So for today, oh yeah, I will do that. And I forgot, I'm sorry. We have one other introduction here, and it's kind of a major oversight on my part. We actually have, for our educational services division overall, which includes accountability, support, and monitoring, which is part of us, curriculum instruction, and student support services. We have a brand new chief academic officer, Mr. Ruben Valles, who just started with us last month. Mr. Valles.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you for all that you do to make sure your schools are compliant, but also that your staff and your teachers know exactly what to do, because I know it can be very overwhelming with all the assessments that we have to do. So, you're the unsung heroes. So thank you for what you do. So I'm new here. Please, I'll put my email in the chat. Please feel free to contact me if you need anything, or if we can provide any more of the excellent service that we do provide at LACOE. I was a consumer of LACOE services more than 2 months ago, and now I'm working with this excellent team, so I'm proud to be here. So have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Mr. Valles. Yeah, it is amazing. We get once you've been to these meetings, you really start to appreciate how much they can provide. So for today, just remember, use the chat. We encourage you. And sometimes it can get a little intimidating, especially if you're new and you see 130 people. I don't want to ask that question. You can always send it to one of us if it's something you don't want to put out there, but we encourage your questions. We're trying to encourage a climate of, no dumb questions is my philosophy, right? And it's the only way we can learn. We are going to stop periodically, and my colleagues will throw some questions at me. Somebody already threw a question to us. By the way, I forgot to mention it. We sent out a pre-meeting survey this time. We'll make that a habit. So if there are questions you want to make sure we cover, please fill out that pre-meeting survey. And I got a question in there that stumped me. So if you sent the question about a student graduating early and the need to take CASP, I'll get back to you on that one. We'll put that in our FAQ follow-up, but that was a good one that I didn't have an answer to. So we'll stop along the way to answer questions. And for anything that we can answer, and we always want to emphasize, we want to give you the most accurate information, and we want to be able to cite sources, which is sometimes kind of hard to do on the fly. So I'd rather take the time to answer correctly and send you that follow-up Q&A that we send out, and we'll send out the Monday following our DAAN meetings. And that will hold true for any of the meetings we hold. We'll always send out a follow-up, just so you have also some memorialization of everything that was said, or questions that get asked. So if something appears in the chat, we will make sure to include it on that follow-up for everybody to have as a reference. Okay. So a couple things we're doing here, just so you know, because I do think that this is something that we struggle with online, is that sometimes it's hard to connect with people. And even though we're online, it seems like it could be easy. Most of the people that I can point to in DAAN and say, oh yeah, we've known each other for several years, at one point we were seated across the table from one another. We were engaged in some conversation, whether it was around assessment or data or something. And it's kind of hard to do that in these online worlds. And in seeing that around the state, SCOE, Sacramento County Office of Ed, has asked us if we would pilot a mentoring program for new coordinators. So any of you who are new to DAAN, expect to see an invite here shortly. And those of you who are kind enough to drop the number of years that you've been working or that you've been in DAAN, expect a follow-up from me as well to see if you'll work as a mentor. I'm probably not going to look for a one-on-one mentoring, that, but what we'd like to do is facilitate some office hours, like between DAAN meetings, where we can get our new coordinators on to ask any questions, and just a couple of our seasoned vets who can join us and answer questions. And I think over time, the affinity to one another will, maybe it's similar sized districts, maybe it's, regional affinity that you will eventually kind of glom onto your people. But we want to try to facilitate that in this online environment until we can resume in person. Additionally, we're going to start holding more office hours. Typically, there'll be office hours specific to a problem. So you'll see shortly, I think that there's some, I've heard from a number of people who'd like to do an office hours around the student growth model data, and they would be happy to join, and some people are willing to contribute to that. And so we can build our capacity around a problem, and by sharing our best practices and what we're doing, or you can just ask questions, because I think sometimes we always have more power as a larger group functioning that way. And then finally, some problem solving collaboratives. And I'm stealing this from my friends in the Moss unit, and Melanie's on here right now. But they've established a really wonderful way that's really problem and solution oriented, but it starts with the problems, and they're kind of ideas that rolled out of their regular meetings, and that we're dealing with long-term English learners, for example. And so each year they have this collaborative that meets regularly just to discuss those and to problem solve, and to have group members share. And so we're looking to do more of these problem solving collaboratives that are very specific and unique to people who work in assessment accountability. So more on that coming forward. Another note, as you may have learned through my email this morning, we're transitioning to Canvas. So LACOE is cleaning up its website. Most of our materials from last year are still uploaded there, and that will be there for a little while, but we're eventually transitioning everything over to Canvas. That includes the DAAN network, all our workshops that we do, and I think you'll find this for everybody in the ed services. So anybody who clicked on the link early this morning discovered we're not we're learning too. It's a learning organization. We needed to make our visibility public, and I think it was still set to course. So, but thanks for bearing with us. So this is evolving, and I was thinking about this morning that you set loose a bunch of people who are left brain dominant, the data people, and expect them to make things that look pretty. Boy, it's probably the toughest thing for me. Like, I have nothing up in my office except for a whiteboard right now with a bunch of squiggly lines. So that's the way I think. So eventually we'll get around. We'll probably have to go hire somebody who can think aesthetically to make our Canvas look a little bit nicer. But this is where you'll find all our resources. You'll find the resources for today, agendas for our meetings, and then links to the things that we think you need to have. And now, with a few minutes I've got before Bob Martin shows up from ETS, I wanted to just give a little primer on this other piece. So we went from being the assessment and accountability unit to the accountability and data literacy unit. And I think people are still kind of wondering what exactly that data literacy piece means. And we actually think of it more in terms of building data culture, or building a culture of data use within your LEA, what that looks like. And there's some key underpinnings to that based in some research. And my colleague Hillary and I are doing a workshop this week specific to career technical education, and how the college and career indicator is shaped by the measures, the career measures, and how CTE, better practices in CTE can influence the college and career indicator, as well as have better outcomes for those students. Of course, that's the primary purpose. But we thought that would be a good way to get a little bit more understanding of what we mean by data literacy and what we're doing. And Hillary's going to give you kind of just a quick primer on what we're doing.
Not a problem. Before I jump into this, I want to make sure that either Margarita or Jaime, our colleagues, will keep an eye on the participants in the admin, the waiting room, as I see our numbers are still ticking up while I kind of pause. And with that, good morning and happy Tuesday, everyone. It's nice to see you. I know it's been a little bit of time here. And I know that everyone is here. I can see in the chat to really, get some resources, have some clarity, make some meaning, network. And with that being said, before we kind of jump into a bunch of updates, I just wanted to take some time here and kind of share with you a little bit of what the data literacy component within our accountability and data literacy unit is kind of looking like. And, when we tend to think of data literacy, there's several meanings. And I think if I had to kind of consolidate them, I kind of look at it as the ability to read, write, understand, create, and communicate data and information to a wide group of educational collaborators. And so with that being said, I'm trying to really leverage the data visuals to capture a little bit of what we have going on here, starting with the slide you see in front of us. And as mentioned, and as Evan mentioned at the beginning here, really kind of giving you a snapshot and an overview of the data literacy unit and really kind of the starting point, which is building that data culture and kind of providing the opportunity to not really dive deeper into, but really around the various metrics within the accountability. But by design, really it's intended to support data cultures, systems, and decision-making through the continuous improvement process, as you can see. Really kind of bridging the gap between assessment, data, and the effective use of data protocols, tools, visualizations such as infographics to really give you some meaningful opportunities for data analysis to kind of unfold. And to speak a little bit more about that, we've currently, teamed up with our CTE unit to provide support around the college career indicator and the impact that CTE completers have on that matrix. And without me asking in the chat, how many of you have spent your summer unpacking the dashboard, specifically the college career indicator, because I can already tell from this group that's your go-to on your free time. I wanted to kind of pause to understand the complexity that really takes place within that. And not just the complexity, but the various ways and the add-ons that kind of go within that measure. And so teaming up with CTE really has allowed us, if you look here, is kind of examine various data points that lend themselves to the data collection analysis process, using really these multiple measures of data to focus on not just them in silos, but really more of where they intersect. We're noticing that where they intersect, there really has a lot more deeper conversation that can transpire that's really somewhat centered around systems. And so here, these are probably the top 4 areas where we've started to look at data and collect data to help give us and accentuate that story or that narrative that kind of goes through and kind of unfolds at each district or site. And another snapshot of what that kind of collaboration looks like with CTE on the next slide is really kind of, I don't know if I want to call this a split screen, but what you're looking at here is, after several meetings, this kind of conversation that we've had in our collaboration. And what you see on the left-hand side here is really this development of a college career, like a mini dashboard, which is really kind of like an extrapolation of the various publicly available data that's been kind of organized into, I would say it's organized over a 3-year period. And this dashboard really allows us to look not just at the LEA, but their student populations and kind of toggle between the populations in relation to completers, to kind of have those pauses that are needed, noticing that when you start to talk data, it's inevitable, if you're familiar with this ladder of inference, for people to look at data and, as all educators, to want to solve, to want to not just make meaning of the data we're seeing, but immediately can transpose what we know has worked, will work, or could work. And what we noticed in creating this dashboard and kind of using it coupled with this tool that you'll see on the right there, which is data observations, is really slowing down that process of jumping to conclusions and instead increasing this analysis process. And so through one of these pauses and slowing down, we realized that a lot of questions and wonderments, which are really great, is what's kind of yielded from looking at this kind of data, which is, you know, wonderful when it comes to our data literacy and kind of expanding those opportunities. But it's also caused to look at the other components that are at the other data components that are at site levels that people have really been wanting to dive deeper into to make that narrative or illustrate that picture a little bit more clear. And so our work with CTE really has kind of been focused around understanding those student populations and understanding, you know, how best to support systems and data cultures at other schools. And with that being said, with any of you, and I see the link is down at the bottom, but I'm going to include it in the chat. Let me see if I can click over here. Excuse me. Two things at once never works. And that's quite the extensive link. But and for those of you who are interested in learning more about this dashboard and the college career indicator and the impact that CTE has on that indicator, please join us this Thursday, as you can see, for our first of our two-part series that we're putting on together. And we look forward to future collaborations and excited to kind of work with everyone.
Thanks, Hillary. And while we're here, and I think it's a great opportunity just to drop in this, wanted to get a little sense from our DAAN members as far as the greatest area of need. So we kind of pick like the core, the foundational pieces to the building a culture of data. And if you could just, you know, identify what you consider your greatest areas needs. And I've been in your chairs before, so I know there's a lot of different, you're getting pulled a lot of ways. Sometimes you're the person who's the data gatekeeper and people are saying, can you get me this data and that data? And so it's like, well, if I could just help build everybody's capacity to get the data. If it's actually facilitating data conversations, are you in that role where you're working with principals or other data leaders, maybe literacy coaches or other coaches to kind of ask the right questions? Creating data visualizations. And this is an area that like I said, not necessarily the most aesthetic MI, but definitely know the power of a good visualization. And more importantly, I've learned the incredible pain of a bad visualization, particularly when you're presenting in front of a board that includes, you know, MD, PhDs who work at RAND. But, you know, maybe that's getting a little too personal. But yeah, do you need some work in data visualization? How about building your data capacity? Governance, do you have clean data or ensuring data quality? Is your data clean? Do you trust your underlying data that you're presenting on the accountability dashboard? Do you have a sense that maybe that could be improved? So if you could just fill out that poll, and I'm just waiting to give another few seconds here. We've got the participation is creeping up. And so as expected, I think there's need across kind of all areas, but we want to try to find some of the sweet spots. We'll bring you elements of this in DAAN, but primarily we're going to be working on problem-specific applications, just like CTE, because one of the things that we know about this is that it's kind of hard to just talk about it in the abstract. It's much easier to work with data when you have data. And so what we hope to do is find either publicly available data or someone who's willing to share their data, you know, obviously anonymized for the purposes of our work, that we can look at it and talk about the various component pieces. So these are just a few of the ways that we hope to engage you and just to get a sense of where they are. I'm going to give you just another 10 seconds if you could, if you haven't already filled this out. We're close to a 2/3 participation rate, which if I was at my, you know, sending out a survey to my staff, I would be pretty okay with that. I feel like my board always wanted 100% participation rate. And I'm like, that never happens. All right. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and I'm going to share the results just so you can see. As we somewhat predicted, we've got pretty much a regular breakdown, but The use of data tools does take the cake, and I think it's great to hear, because I think one of the ways we hope to be able to collaborate is with Stephen and the use of IABs and diving into that data and what that means and the kind of protocols that might slow everything down. I just finished listening to the book Smarter, Faster, Better by Charles Duhigg. I don't know if anybody's ever read that book or listened to it. It's great. But he calls the concept disfluency, right? And it's actually, sometimes you have to take the data and literally in a school district, I think it was in Ohio, they had teachers actually taking data and then rewriting it, transcribing it onto cards, and then resorting it and reshuffling. But the impact of actually grappling with the data in that way was a significant shift in understanding and some real insights that were gained. So that's kind of what we would want to do with our use of data tools, slow things down to bring about better understanding. Some data visualization tools will bring some of that, but also then building data capacity around governance systems, data teams. Those are all things we definitely would like to tap into. So great, thank you for participating in that. And we will move on. And we do have in the house, Bob Martin. Bob, are you unmuted? Can you unmute?
I am now.
Okay. Speaking of former DAAN members, we are pleased to introduce Bob Martin, who's the Director of Product Operations Management for ETS, the contractor who delivers CASP and LPAC. And Bob used to be a DAAN member, and now he's always nice enough to come back and give us the latest updates around CASP and LPAC.
Thank you, Evan. And quite honestly, there's not a whole lot of updates. We did put out a notice yesterday that the student data report has been updated, and that was pushed out. The CSA SSR should be going out today on October 5th. Otherwise, we know that everybody is currently hard at work getting their initial LPAC going. We did pull reports and give them to the CDE. They were looking at numbers as far as LEAs who have students past the 30-day mark. I don't know if they'll be sending out reminder emails and that. Please know this. We send out those reminder emails just because we're supposed to be keeping track and letting you all know that we're keeping track and all that. We're not trying to put extra stress. And as a matter of fact, if there's anything where we can help you out, but you're always welcome to reach out to us or the LPAC office at the CDE. Our job isn't to make yours harder, but to find ways to help you out. So initial LPAC is running. It is allowed to be run remotely as well as in person. The biggest things that we've seen happening, we did put out an email that went out to the LEA LPAC coordinators, and it also went out to the CalPADS coordinators. So we sent the exact same email out to both sets of coordinators to hopefully get some conversations going, because issues that we have seen, people were saying about SSIDs and the fact that they were having problems. Now, we do know that there was a slight delay in getting the SSIDs through CalPADS and all that, but in reality, what we're really seeing from LEAs who are telling us that they're having problems getting SSIDs is in the fact, or getting students into testing, is the fact that either the CalPADS file is not being uploaded, and if it doesn't get uploaded, the students don't go into TOMS. If they don't go into TOMS, you can't test them. So while your CalPADS person might be updating their file that they have, until they upload it, that day that they upload it, that night, it talks to TOMS, and then TOMS talks to the testing system the next night. So it does take a 2-day process to get it all the way over. Now, the other area where we've been seeing, because I've been working one-on-one with a lot of LEAs, they're telling me, hey, we're going in and our kids have no tests available, the system's not working, and we take the time and we look into TOMS. And I want to remind everybody that in order for a child to be able to take the initial LPAC, they have to be into TOMS, they have to be in the test system, but you also need to look inside of TOMS and make sure that they have an ELAS, an English language acquisition status of TBD, and that the primary language, this is the one that's causing the most problems, the primary language has to be other than English. If they have a TBD, but they have English, the system won't let them test. So there's been a lot of cleaning up of the CalPADS files going on with different districts. and a lot of conversation happening. So once those have been being cleaned up, the system does seem to be working the way it's supposed to, and the students are being able to test. The other area that has caused a little bit of confusion is inside of TOMS, there is a field called the remote testing video permission. And we set every student to no. And people who are giving the initial LPAC remotely are asking, oh, I have to turn that to a yes in order to remote test. You don't. And I'm going to try to explain this. I confuse myself sometimes when I try to explain this, so I'm going to try to do my best here. That field does not say the child can test remotely. In reality, a child can test remotely without that field. What that field says is the child has permission to use the camera within the testing browser. So we're saying that the child would be able to turn their camera on within the testing browser. Now, last year, because of these students are new to the country, they have a very basic, if basic, understanding of English. It was difficult to use a secure browser and walk a child through the login process because of the cameras and the microphones and everything. So we said, fine. So use the web-based testing interface, leave the camera set as a no, and then you can use the camera and microphone within your Zoom or Google Meet or whatever video software that you're using. So because if you have the camera on in the testing browser and in your Zoom, it'll conflict and it won't work. So leave it to a no, and then use the camera inside of the or the whatever software you're using. Other than that, initial LPAC seems to be going fairly well. I know the difficult part really is what I'm hearing is getting the kids into test because they're out due to COVID, or they're out because the kid next to them had COVID and now they got to be out. And then of course our teachers are out. So we understand that. We truly get that. There, as a matter of fact, we sent out a survey where we were asking our LEAs, where are the issues coming up? And of course, absences of staff, I think we heard that more than we heard the absences of the students themselves. And we get it. There's a substitute shortage and everything else like that. So we understand that. We have informed the CDE of all of that information, so they do have it. Now, I see people saying, hey, can we get an extension? ETS does not do extensions. That is through the CDE. That's a CDE function. We just provide the test in during the testing window. So while I understand that people are asking if we could do the extension and everything else like that is that's something I have no control over. I wish I could go, poof, you guys get an extension, but and don't walk out of here saying Bob just gave us an extension. No, I didn't. I did not. But that, the CDE is watching everything very, very carefully.
Just add, Bob, and thank you. Yeah, that's a great point. It's federal legislation, so even the state couldn't wave a magic wand and make it go away. They'd have to apply for a waiver. And thus far, I haven't heard anyone say that a waiver application was likely, but I've heard repeatedly, and I will reclaim it here, document. So if you're subject to federal program monitoring, they come in and you have the EL instrument, they're going to look and they're going to want to know if you were able to test your initials within the 30 days. And if these kinds of reasons, which are real and legitimate reasons, are documented, I suspect that you'll be given some grace because it's so widespread now. But yeah, it's not probably going to change the 30 days. And we'll talk in a little bit about the impact on the unduplicated pupil count as well. There's other implications besides just federal program monitoring, but do document.
Now, I do see the comment, and I think it's Lara or Lara. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, and I'm horrible with it. My students used to hate me. I always called my students sir and ma'am, and they thought I was the most respectful person in the world. And it was really, I just had no idea how to say their names. So somebody wrote, by the time the window came out about the CalPADS fields, our 30 days were over. Now, the information about the CalPADS fields and everything are inside the Alpac TAM and all that. But what I'm going to do is take this information and we will put reminder emails out early in the spring. Although I will tell you that during the spring, during our coffee sessions, we were telling people early on that they had to do that, but we'll try to figure out a better way to, or a different way. We'll keep the ways that we were communicating it this year, and then we'll look for even more ways to hit that home so that everybody understands it. And then for those school districts who do start early, or even the ones that don't start until sometime in August, also remember the fact that for the initial LPAC, once you have the SSID, and this is the kicker, once you have the SSID, you can assess a student up to 60 days before the first day that they're in school. So and I know what a few LEAs were doing, they were taking advantage of the remote this year, that they would have the kids come in, they would enroll, they'd get the SSID, and then a few of them were saying, well, you don't have to come back, we'll test you over the computer. And they were doing their initial LPAC from the child's home as the child was pre-enrolled.
Yeah, the pre-enrollment, I know some of our larger districts who do have a large number of English learners were using the pre-enrollment. You can pre-enroll up to 6 months. Is that not, is it right, Bob Martin? You can pre-enroll for 6 months out. I think that's the business rules in CalPADS. Put you on the spot there.
Okay. Other than that, we do have the test administration window open. So please, we showed it on our last coffee session. If you weren't in our last coffee session, we do have the recording up there. We did a demonstration for the spring for your math and ELA. Please go in now, make sure you have your instructional calendar with you. Go in to set up your test window. And the reason I say to have your instructional calendar with you is the first thing you have to do is you have to tell the system every day that your kids are not in school so that it can figure out how many days into the test site or the school year you can start your testing. Angie, I'll put a link for the recordings in here. But you need to go in, you tell it how many days they're not there. It'll come up and say, okay, your test window is starting on this day, going to this day, which is normally the end of your school year. Do you really want your test window to be that big? And then you can shrink your test window down to what's appropriate for your school district. And then you save it. Now, the one thing that we showed in the demonstration and that I will stress here, a lot of people think once they've saved their test window that they're done. Now, I was at a RAND meeting last week and I gave out a gold star. Can anybody tell me what the one thing that many LEAs miss when setting up their test administration window? Who gets a gold star?
Assign them to a school.
Oh, Carla.
There we go. Signing into the school, assigning it to the schools, adding the schools to the window. A lot of people will set up their district window and think that they're done. And then in the spring, they're like, why can't my schools test? Well, you didn't connect your schools to the testing windows. So you need to do that. Other than that, right now for testing, you have your initial LPAC. Oh, there's 2 other tests that you can have happening right now. Who gets a silver star? Yes, the All for Science. It's funny. This is like the respectful RAN. Nobody opens their mic and just screams out the answer. They all type it into their chat box. Yes, the All for Science opened up, and it does go all year long. Now, last year couldn't do All for Science. You couldn't do it remote. The year before, it was I think the first year that it went the whole year, or maybe the second year. But here's what you need to remind your teachers. First of all, the CDE freaks out when they see that somebody has tested all 4 Alt for Science sections on one day for a kid, because that's not how it's supposed to work. The Alt for Science forms are assigned. The teachers can see the DFAs, they can see exactly what the subjects are, so they can incorporate the alternate for science assessments into their curriculum, because the way it's supposed to work is you're actually supposed to assess the kids right after you're done teaching a unit on whatever the subject is for that Alt for Science. So yes, the Alt for Science is running. talk with your teachers, get them through their training, and then please make sure they start giving it early on so that come spring, our poor students aren't trying to do the alt for English, the alt for math, the alt for science, and then if they need the LPAC on top of that. So this is one of those assessments that you can do spread throughout the year. And then, of course, the other one that you can be doing is the interim assessments. So the interim assessments, you have the focused IABs, you have the IABs, and you have the ICAs. Remember, those are different than any other assessment because a teacher could actually use those in a classroom, projected on a screen. The kids could work together on them. You know, one of the things I hear from some teachers is the SBAC doesn't have the same type of vocabulary I use. While the interim assessments, if I was back in the classroom, I would actually be pulling up some questions from the interim assessment as a bell warm up. I'd be flashing it up on my projector and I'd say, okay, guys, let's read this question together. Let's talk about it. What are we being asked for? What are we looking for in here and everything else like that? And it's a great way to introduce the vocabulary without stressing the students out. Because I can't answer the question as to why. I can go back and find out why the science is spread throughout, and the ELA and the math are summative assessments. That's why they're in the spring. But the science is more of a performance tasks. Any updates on API connections with SIS vendors? Yes, if you have Aries, they've been working with people on SIRS. So if you've reached out to Aries and they say it's not possible, reach out to them again, because I know other districts who are Aries and they're using it with SIRS. So I don't know about the other vendors, but reach out and we can find that out. And if you can't get it, reach out to Caltech and they can help you, give you the proper things to ask for. And then as far as Sarah, it doesn't make sense to have it at the end of the unit. That's fine. We're not telling you when to do the science. We're just asking that you try to spread it out throughout the year a little bit, just because these poor students, first of all, they have their own struggles. So the last thing we want them to do is sit for one day and take 4 different assessments within science.
There was a question a little bit earlier from Melanie from here at LACOE. Do you have any information on the validity and reliability reports the CDE said they would share about the 2021 summative LPAC last year? Do you know where that stands?
I have not heard anything about the validity reports as of yet, but Evan, if you can send me the printout from the chat and any questions and all that, I'll take anything you got and I'll come back to you with answers and then you can get them out to your team.
Thank you. We'll do that. Bob, if you don't mind staying on, I've got more. I actually sat in and watched your presentation last week, so I did add a few slides based on what I knew you would talk about. Maybe you could, maybe it'll inspire a couple other thoughts or questions may arise, and you can answer.
Sure, I'll just hang here quietly and I'll watch the chat. And then Evan, if you do see a question pop up that I don't see, feel free just to ask me. But I can hang for a little bit. That's fine. Great, thank you. So as Bob had mentioned, the CDE and ETS are doing copy sessions. And as it turns out, this Thursday is the next one from 2 to 3 p.m. So I've included the link in the PowerPoint. So if you want to join in topics, correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, they're supposed to include speech to text demonstration, that 1% threshold. Copy sessions are on Friday.
Friday. Did I put the wrong date down? What day is it?
So you said Thursday. So.
Oh yeah, Friday. Sorry about
Evan,
that.
I need to step away from my computer for a second. So I'll be back in about 5 minutes.
Okay. All right, Bob. Thanks. So yeah, so Friday. Pardon me. That was office hours that were on Thursday. So copy sessions are Fridays 2 to 3. So tune in this week. Some alternate LPAC information. I think this is kind of critical information that I hopefully folks are already kind of have on the radar. This is the first administration of the alternate LPAC and the testing window, November 1st of this year through February 15th. I did add, again, I sent it out to you earlier, but it's in the resources for today, the updated CDE timeline that includes this and all other resources. And I would highly recommend taking a look at the CDE's alternate LPAC resource page. There's a lot of good things there. Just a few recommendations, and I think my colleagues at Riverside County put these out there, but definitely get your test examiners certified in Moodle this month. So they'll be able to take full advantage of the entire window. And always a good idea to coordinate with your special education administrator or team along with your LPAC coordinator. That's, LPAC coordinator is not always the CASP coordinator, to get them working together on this one. So they have kind of a common knowledge, a shared common knowledge of what elements are in there in the new alternate LPAC. Also, just note that if IEPs are needed to change, then this can add significant time prior to testing. So be aware of that. And then, as always, any test settings that need to be updated, you need to allow that 24 to 48 hours for them to update in TOMS from the time you put them in, time they're manually entered. I've included a link here for the CalAlt Moodle at a glance flyer, so it includes all the trainings and their availability. So I think that's kind of a key part. I think that the science, the CalAlt science assessment, I think that hopefully that's on most people's radar already, that you're getting, because it is a year-long administration, unlike the CalAlt for English language arts and math, that you're, again, getting the test examiners ready in Moodle so that they can take full advantage of having the whole year and can integrate it throughout the year on the timeline that feels best for them. Ruth adds, the certification is really long for test examiners. I haven't gone through the test, the certification for any of the alternate assessments. So I'll take your word on that, Ruth, and I'm going to assume that that's a plug for start early because it's going to take a while. Wow. So videos alone over 200 minutes. Wow. Okay. So good to know. Thank you for sharing that. For those of you who've been to it, super long videos. So Jeffrey, thank you for sharing that. Okay. So please note, DAAN members, that you're, manage expectations for test examiners needing to log in. So this came out, and Bob didn't touch on it. You probably heard the phrase alt for all. So the CDE is looking to ensure some uniformity across all the alternate assessments. So system enhancements were made to ensure uniformity in assignment of alternate assessments in TOM. So basically, if you qualified to administer the alt LPAC, then you're going to be assigned all the other alternative assessments as they come up. Of course, those alternate assessments for ELA math wouldn't be needed until older grades, but just know that once you're identified for one, you're identified for all of them. The DFAs have been revised and improved for consistency across the alternate assessments, and all those can be accessed in the TOMS system. And finally, I included this link to this response options for alternate assessments. This isn't completely new. This was actually out, I think, in March. But it's good guidance for the 3 student response options. So make sure that your test examiners for the alts all have those. And then Bob touched on this, I think, or it was in our previous link. So there is guidance, and it's been updated recently around the alternate assessment for IEP teams. And there's some clarification there around specific learning disabilities not qualifying for the alternate assessment. So it's good to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as who qualifies for the alternate assessments. I think there's still some confusion left over from STAR days when we think about the California Modified Assessment and who kind of falls into that kind of in-between ranking. But the CalAlt is really designed for just the 1% of our students, non-severe students who are qualified. So there is an exception, and currently there's, you need to submit LEAs that exceed that 1% threshold. And there are reasons why that's legitimate, just in terms of the demographics of certain communities or for, special programs. But for those LEAs that do plan to exceed the 1% threshold, there is a survey that needs to be filled out. The current survey, the 21-22 survey, is not up yet. I see only the 2021 that's linked there on the CD's threshold, and I've got the link here for that page. But if you can work with your special education team to make sure that they fill this out if they think they're going to exceed that 1%, that would be helpful. I don't know when that survey will be available. I just checked, like I said, yesterday, October 4th, as of yesterday, it still wasn't up, but it could be going up anytime now. And that's something I'll follow up on with the CDE to know when they expect to update that. This is a new series. I just want to put on your radar. The CDE is doing these kind of quarterly assessment updates, a webinar series, and I've got the link down there. All these links are, any of the trainings are available on the CASP.org upcoming training opportunities website. But I will put these on your calendar. They are all, unlike some of them, you can't register for all of them simultaneously. You have to register for each individual one. So make sure you go in and scroll down and get those links now, because that'll be helpful information for those of you who are CASP coordinators and LPAC coordinators. The 2021 CASP and LPAC, the aggregate student results releases, many of you already know. Currently, the CASP individual CASP scores are available in TOMS. The LPAC are expected to populate in late fall. I have no other specific dates now. Believe me, we were in RAN, we were asking, can you give us a little more specific? We don't know the exact release date. There will be a public release in late fall of the aggregate data. And just to assure you, there was that brief window for the preview, and I think a lot of people have asked, will it be reopened? Yes, there will be another preview window open for the LEA, the secure accountability coordinators. I'll get to that in a minute because there's some confusion over that too. But there will be another preview window that opens before the public release. The 21-22 CASP and LPAC, there have been a couple of changes, and this came up as a couple of people wanted to know about this. So the board, the state board did approve the continued use of the adjusted blueprints for the Smarter Balanced ELA and math. The remote administration was made available. Bob already touched on that, and the difference between remote administration and that yes, no in TOMS that needs to be selected to have a student's remote camera available. And then alternate assessments must be administered in person. So I think that was always kind of a given. That's not an option for the alt assessments to remote administration. So I'm going to dive in a little bit more detail around the summative blueprints. So, and I'm going to get, I got a question about local assessments. I'll get to that probably more around the accountability section. So just the rationale, around the shorter blueprints, they were derived from the adopted Smarter Balanced summative assessment blueprints. So they weren't completely new. They do, as many of you know who did administer CASP last year, they reduced the computer adaptive portion to about 50% for each claim. So it's significantly reduced in time, and that was a big, saved a lot of time. So I think that's seen as a benefit again this year, given the ongoing logistical challenges of getting students tests. It does, however, maintain the performance tasks. The performance tasks are still there. It maintains a comparable proportion of content across the claims, and it maintains the same depth of knowledge. No claim data. That's I'll get to that in a second, Ruth. So the advantages of using the shortened blueprints are that it reduces the amount of time students need to spend, provide some flexibility in scheduling and monitoring students for administration. It still meets the state and federal requirements for testing in ELA and math. So that's a good thing that flexibility was extended and still meets the federal requirements. And it will report your scale scores and achievement levels. However, it will not report the claims level. And for those of you who uploaded the information or looking for it in SIRS, you find that there are no claims in this year. So the fields for the claims were eliminated for the 2021 administration. So that's the unfortunate downside. You can't get the claims, nor the assessment target reports for groups of students can't be reported. So that's the downside to that. I do see a question Angie asked about the CAS not adjusted. I need to go dive into that actually. That I believe they did modify, and I would point you in the direction of the handout that's linked in Canvas for the RAN. So these are all the meeting notes that we get for RAN, the Regional Assessment Network. So that's the statewide meeting with Mao Vang weighs in on, and there was conversation. Actually, Bob, you're back. Do you know?
Sorry about that.
That's okay. The CAST, was there a shortening of the blueprints in CAST, or was there some consideration around that?
My understanding of the CAST is the fact that it was as short as it could be in order for them to get the information that they needed to do that with.
Okay, and thanks. And Eric already weighed in. Yeah, thank you for that. So the next steps will be looking at that, the shortened blueprints to evaluate the validity and adjustments for future use. Any insights around that conversation or when that might be, Bob?
Let's say that one again. Ed.
Just in terms of ongoing, looking at the truncated blueprints, if that may become a permanent feature, or will we get back to it? Because a lot of people, I think, really like the claims level.
As far as my understanding right now, they only talked about this year. They have not talked about future years or anything else like that.
Okay.
They'll probably be having conversations with LEAs and with RANs to get input as to what they feel with what they're getting out of these.
Yeah. Okay, so stay tuned on that one. I know there's not just the claims, but I think the target reports that people were actually coming to find real value in. So I do expect that they'll seek some input from stakeholders, from LEAs.
And Evan, there was one other thing that did come up as I was away from my computer that I really wanted to stress again. We've been announcing it. And I think all the LEA coordinators have a good understanding of this, but the problem is, of course, the LEA coordinators are not the ones who work with the special education teachers. So please get with your special education department. Cannot stress enough, All for All started last year. It is continuing this year. So if, November, well, even now with science, if you start an assessment with a child and have them taking the alternate assessment, you are locking them in for the alternate assessment for all assessments, regardless of what they have on the IEP. So please get with your special education teachers and have them look at IEPs. And if they have deemed that a child has to be an alternate assessment, they need to make sure they're checking the alternate assessment on all assessments on that IEP. And the reason I'm bringing it up now is you might have to go back and do an addendum to the IEP. So I'd rather you know about that now and not have to be rushing through those as we get closer to the spring assessing.
Thanks, Bob. That's a great point. So the Moodle training site for the Summit of LPAC opens on October 18th. And if you haven't been there lately, the Moodle website has been revamped. So it actually has a new link to the Moodle training site. I've got the new link is linked here on this slide. So as you're preparing for the summative, know that that'll be open very soon. So just quickly, SIRS, I know a lot of you are already familiar with SIRS, but I think it's always crucial to kind of remind people, those of you who are new. So this is where you can get your results from CASP and LPAC summative assessments, as well as your interim assessments broken down by student groups. It's really a powerful tool. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about the other ways. It includes your overall scale scores, achievement levels, and claim level. I put a little asterisk there because you won't have claim level if you administered the CASP last year, as you know. So there's a lot more detail, though: test item and student responses, item key, distractor analysis, and links to other resources. So powerful stuff in SIRS. There's also the 2021 interim assessment results are available there, as well as if you administered any of the CASP from last year, that would be available in there, your summative LPAC. And additionally, you've got results from prior years. So the interim assessments, the Smarter Balance, the CalAlt, the California Spanish Assessment, CAST, the Alt for Science was not around yet, and the alternate LPAC was not either. However, moving forward, those two tests will be available. Results for those will be available in the summer of next year. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend the SIRS Sandbox. It's a great training tool. I've linked it here. It's a great way to introduce teachers and principals to SIRS and how they can build reports. It has mock data available for different levels. It includes a variety, and I have a screenshot there, so you can see they have a bunch of different assessments, so you can build a customized reporting, and you have no risk of exposing PII for any students. I've also linked the really helpful guides. We go over this a little bit in our new coordinator training for CASP and LPAC coordinators. And I think just in looking at it, it's a great resource for teaching to building some data fluencies and building data culture without having to worry about is it populated with adequate data right now. So any additional questions before we move on? Oops.
Evan, I just saw a question kind of pop up related to SIRS about a transfer student and their scores not showing up from a previous school. And they want to know if they can assume that student wasn't tested.
Bob, there is a switch there. It's like you could choose LEA tested or.
Right, and if the child isn't showing up, they could do a quick call over to Caltech, and Caltech can take a look to see if the child has nothing available. It's a weird situation from last year. It's the fact that we just don't know who tested and who didn't. So if they have the SSID and they reach out, they will be able to give them the information as to whether or not the student tested.
Will that information ever be made public? Like it is of a public concern which districts were successful in implementing testing online remotely last year and which ones opted out. I think that's a very key accountability measure to figure out, so the districts that didn't test can learn from the ones that did test, about some of those best practices.
Chris, I'm going to take that back to the CDE and see what they're going to do with that. Now, my understanding is when you all turn in your SARC this year, you have to indicate what you did or did not do, correct?
Right. So maybe the SARC reports would be an indication of that. I'd love to see an amalgamation of that. But, also, I had a previous question, might have gotten lost in the shuffle when you took off, but really still anxious after 6 or 7 years of doing the CAST testing and pre-test and stuff, of being able to drill down to the individual standards on these. The roll-up scores are very difficult, if not impossible, for us to unpack. And what we're really anxious to understand is, are we being successful in teaching main idea, or the semicolon, and when are we not being successful at those state standards? And we've never really been able to drill down to that, and I don't know why, because we have the data. It's all keyed by standards, so we'd be able to produce an anonymous report, not tied to students, but just that at this grade level, at this school, 40% of the kids mastered this standard versus 80% of the kids mastered this standard. That would be so helpful. And I don't understand why, 5 or 6 years into this, we still don't have that level of access.
Can I add
thoughts on that?
I'm taking some very detailed notes about what you're asking here, and I'm going to take this back to the number of people and find out.
I just wanted to add something to that, though. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. Wouldn't that we can use that data by giving the focus the IABs, because they're linked to target and the targets are aligned to the standards?
Absolutely, Ruben. But we don't want to have to do that additional work when we're already being required by our charter organization to do NWEA, or we're using iReady to do a third. The data exists. Why not harvest it? It would increase the value of state testing, and it would endear our teachers to the state testing because they get much more actionable data out of it. So rather than introducing a fourth layer, we just want to harvest the crops, the seeds that we've already sown.
One suggestion, though, that I would have, like in my network of schools in my previous role, I would just the schools would the teachers, and they actually used it by giving the IABs as a pre and a post. And then that way, they would do a pre, then they would do a 6 weeks and embed that in their instruction on that IAB.
That's fine. When I go in for my annual physical, I expect the results from that annual physical. I don't want to go get an annual physical, lock those results in a lockbox, and then have to come in periodically to take my temperature and blood pressure every other week. So that's my analogy for why let's unpack the existing data. Let's show the parents the response the student gave on the written performance task and explain to them, because this was only a single paragraph that didn't answer the question, that's why they got a 0. But this other student that wrote 3 paragraphs that addressed both questions, that's why it's a 2. We have the data, it's stored electronically. Let's unpack it. After all these years, let's actually unpack the data that we're capturing. The scale scores are unique to that one student. Organizationally, we don't understand how we're doing on any particular standard. So it cheapens
Yeah.
the value of the, and knocking these down by 50%, even when we're back on campus and doing regular testing, again, ruins the validity and the reliability of these tests. Last year's scores were not comparable to 2019 scores, regardless of what I'm hearing from my colleagues at CDE. Respectfully, I disagree. These are fundamentally different tests, and even within my own organization, the data team is comparing 2019 to 2021 data without putting an asterisk saying, these are two different tests, and you need to understand that they may not be comparable. Is my 20% across the board drop in CASP scores a result of COVID, distance learning, or a fundamental restructuring of the scope of the test? I don't know. I may never know.
Chris,
Yeah, I agree. So thanks for sharing. And
Yeah,
hopefully the CDU will get back with a response on that.
yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but we're running really short on time. We have a lot to get. We haven't touched on accountability. Bob, I heard you say you'll take that back to Chris's concerns, and maybe we can
Yeah,
report out.
I
on it.
do.
Okay.
And I will agree with Ruben and Eric as well about the IABs. You know, they're nice to be using throughout the year. I know a lot of teachers are using them at the beginning of the school year to get a good feel for where their students are and everything. But Chris, I'll take what you're asking here, and I'll take it back. And then Evan, there is a question in there about whether or not LEAs need to report their local data. With if a student has moved to a new LEA, do they have to share the local data? That's actually a question for the CDE. So Evan, that might be one for you to reach out to the CDE and then reach back out to your RAN here and let them know what you found out.
I will do that. They got some good stump the band questions there. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your insights are very timely and always welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. And have a great school year, everybody. And we're here to help you out. So we got some cool stuff coming up that you'll hear about shortly.
Okay, thank you. So just want to get through some of the accountability portion and try not to rush too much. We're going to touch on some of the local assessment issues for the SARC and the LARC that Bob touched on. Just a quick refresher. So the federal waiver that the state applied for and received last year removed the requirement to publish any state level indicators on the California School Dashboard, and then subsequent legislation in AB 130 then further cemented that. So they suspended the publication of state indicators on the dashboard. They required that the state would report valid and reliable data as well as publishing the local indicators. So what will that look like? So for the state indicators, the plan is that the CD will be sharing valid, reliable data to support LEAs in developing LCAPs. Where those will be found include the California School Dashboard. If you looked at the additional reports, the college and career indicator that went up last year was really very useful, as well as the graduation rate. And then on DataQuest, there will be numerous reports available there for LEAs to use, including some new ones. For any of you who worked on the LCAP this year, that dreaded metric, which was the combined CTE completer and A through G completer, which was really difficult to get. That'll actually be reported this year. So those will be on DataQuest. As far as local indicators, this data will be available. Hopefully, if you are your LEA was able to get these approved by your board in conjunction with the LCAP, that was the expectation. However, the local indicators will not have a met, not met this year. You're only going to be uploading them. So there would be, if for some reason they weren't initially approved, get them approved by your board before uploading them. So you'll have those posts, but there again won't be any met, not met criteria. Those were removed in the legislation that I just discussed. So the dashboard is open. So the responses need to be submitted by October 15th. And I believe that Dina Wilson, the Director of Accountability, Support, and Monitoring, sent out a notice. She spoke to the superintendents last week and mentioned this. So if you have any questions about the status, we do have a spreadsheet. It's about a week and a half old now, but whether or not your dashboard has been updated. Speaking of which, there's a little bit of confusion. I know we've reached out to a number of our charters and particularly our districts, but there was some confusion. And I think the confusion stemmed from people thinking the dashboard coordinator and the accountability coordinator were one and the same. There are actually two different roles there. So the dashboard coordinator is specifically responsible for uploading the local metrics and making sure those are input. And that's an annual renewal that your superintendent has to sign off of. In addition, there's a secure accountability coordinator. And I sent out the information, but as of about a week and a half ago, only about a third of our LEAs had a secure accountability coordinator. And so the CDE had asked us if we could reach out. So I'm reaching out again here. If you have any questions, I do have a list. Each LEA is afforded 2 secure accountability coordinators. What this role receives are updates around the dashboard, any data releases, when they release the growth model data, you would have received the code to access the public, or not public, the release that was available, embargoed release. So there are 2 people available in the accountability listserv. You can look to see who's listed. If there's nobody listed and you think maybe I should apply, you can have 2 people. They can always remove 1 person if you exceed that amount, but make sure that somebody's on there. Otherwise, you're going to miss the vital information that gets sent to that accountability listserv. So SARCs, and I just wanted to be able to talk about this because we did get a new template approved at the July 2021 meeting. And I've included the link here as well as the data element definitions. So among the things that were added this year, and I do want to kind of bring some awareness to this, these are new teacher tables that will be pre-populated by the CDE. So the SARC will have these pre-populated. Why I want to bring your attention to them is that there's a good chance that given the complexity of the credentialing and the federal definitions of ineffective and out of field, also known as misassigned, we'll put that into a big category together. They differ, I think, than the understanding of a lot of credential analysts and HR people. So they are using data that came through CalSAS. So if you recall, CalSAS and assignment monitoring, the CalPADS pushes out course information. The CTC has a database full of teacher credentials. These mush together in CalSAS, and then they get a report. And primarily it's being used by the CTC and county authorities and HR to make sure that districts have the proper authorizations. However, on the back end, the CDE is getting back a report that they're still kind of working through, because that's how complicated it is, that shows misassignments based on the federal standards, the federal definitions, which are for the ineffective out of field. And so you may have self-reported, and this has always been the issue around self-reporting. If you self-reported in your LCAP and also in the SARCs, we had no misassignments because your HR credentials analyst said, well, no, we got a local assignment option for that, we're fine. That met the state criteria for acceptable assignment, but it probably didn't meet the federal assignment. And you may end up with your SARCs showing, I had 3 misassignments and wondering why. So, and it's not a huge deal. It's just knowing that there may be some additional differences there. So don't be surprised. Don't be worried, but don't be surprised when you do see some changes. I've kind of moved on quickly, but let me stop and answer a couple questions here I've seen. You have an interim superintendent. This is about the dashboard. Is there a different way to get approved? I would reach out. I think there's an FAQ, or there is an FAQ that has information for the dashboard. I would reach out to the dashboard at CDE. I will include that response. So anybody's having trouble getting access because maybe superintendents have changed over. I had my own, for getting the secure accountability coordinator, my superintendent did not receive the initial pass, so I actually had to have them remove it and resend it. So I can work with you on that. Is there a template for the parent notification letter for the alt LPAC? I'm going to have to check on that, Matt. I'm not aware of one. I mean, it's that. Oh, Eric, thank you. See, the best part about having a network here, Eric has shared that. And Eric, if you'll send me that notification, I will post that onto our Canvas. Is board approval for local indicators a recommendation or mandatory? It's actually mandatory. It has to be a non-consent item. It was supposed to go in conjunction with the LCAP. Again, there would be no repercussions this year if it didn't, and you would not be alone. It's I think it kind of got missed in the craziness at the end of the year that a lot of times local indicators didn't get approved in conjunction. But if you can get them approved, you definitely want to get them approved before they go public, because they will be outward facing, and you don't want any of your educational partners and community members saying, we never saw this, it was never on a board agenda. So not ideal, but better late than never. Do the local indicators need to be board approved prior to October 15th? Yeah, it would have been prior to July 1st, but get them when you can get them. I think that, I know it's, if you haven't got them approved yet, they better that you again have your board approve them in a public and transparent way, because the dashboard, once you post them, it will be a while before that dashboard is outward facing. So you want to get them approved, even if it's after the October 15th. What I don't know, and I will put this caveat out there, if the dashboard is smart enough to say to reject a date that comes after October 15th. I don't know that it is. I think it's just a text field, but I haven't uploaded lately. If we submit now, can we say we met? There's no met, no met. You don't have to self-report met, no met this year. It's just, you're just posting them for public review. Marissa, if you presented with the LCAP but do not have an action item for them, does that count? It didn't have to be an action item. It could have been an information item. I think if they were combined and you had, they were combined with the LCAP and they were actually presented, I think my concern would be if they were presented in as they are embedded in the LCAP, because they're not a perfect alignment. The self-reflection tools are a little bit too meaty to actually drop in the LCAP. So, if you added a lot to the narrative response, I would want to share that publicly. But if you share the narrative responses or the self-reflection tools in conjunction with the LCAP, that would be fine. I would use that date when they're approved. The local assessment tables, I know this is a big question. So they did add these local assessment tables. We have the SARC template available on the Canvas page. And you'll see that the table 17 and 18 are where you report your local assessments if you did not administer CASP. If you administered CASP, that will be populated by the CDE automatically on the SARC, in the SARC system. However, if you use the local assessments, you're required to fill out these tables. You're responsible. I checked with the CDE for, just like in any publicly available forum, if you had a student group of 10 or less, you need to suppress that data for that group before reporting. So they recommend just using 2 dashes. And that is actually, they specified that not in the template next to 17 and 18, but there's an addendum to the template. And so I go to the addendum, and that is where you'll find the details about that. In addition, the addendum has tables that you'll fill out for the LARC. I love the name, the LARC. So you have to post the SARC and the LARC. So this is the LARC is where you'll report out on your LEA level. So an aggregate of all your schools, if you're in a district, for your local assessments, if that's what you chose. LCAP approval by or presented to school board. Yeah, so your LCAP would have been approved. Yeah, it was supposed to be an item done in conjunction, because theoretically you're supposed to use the local indicators to inform your LCAP. Jennifer, the LARC template is not up yet. The LARC is a weird one. The LARC is, there's an online, it's not a template like Word. It was last year, it was an online only template, and it was not, there was a little window that you filled out online for the few self-reported items. This year, you'll have to add these tables. So I would just have them prepared. And I think for any district that or charter that was doing their own aggregation of the data for local assessment, just take a look at that, the SARC, and look in the addendum and be prepared with that data when the window opens. Sarah, so sorry, local indicators approved by or reviewed by school board. Yes, the local indicators were supposed to be approved and reviewed and approved. They don't have to be an action item, but they should be an information item. They be shared with the board in a non-consent item. That's the way the language reads. And I'm going to apologize in advance because we are definitely going to go a little bit over, but we're recording this. So if you aren't able to stay on for the entire duration, just know that we'll have a recording available. We'll post that. So just remember, these were the criteria for the local assessment. If the statewide assessment of CASP was not viable, then you use an alternate assessment that met the following criteria. I think you're all pretty familiar with that after last spring. I think viability was the word of the spring. So SARC, the science assessments, if it was some LEAs did administer CAS last year. And if you did administer that, that will actually be pre-populated in your SARC. If you didn't administer the SARC or the CAS because of viability concerns, you were not obligated to find an alternative to that. So there would be no alternative assessment for science that you would need to include in your SARCs. So just what will accountability look like in 2022? So in the fall of 2022, I think. So the state indicators in the fall of 22, the dashboard, we're going to display the status only based on the data from the year we're currently in. Local indicators will be submitted just like they will be this year. The CDE is going to examine new measures for the college and career indicator. And part of what we're presenting on Thursday is there are new career measures that were introduced to the college and career indicator in 2020, and people clearly weren't aware because for most of them we had a big goose egg reported. I mean, in some cases, absolutely a goose egg, and a couple we had just a scattering of the new measures. So there are going to be new measures on top of the measures that were just introduced in 2020. So if you want to know more about those, you may consider joining us on Thursday for the improving CT data. Schools and LEAs will be identified for support using the 21-22 data. What that looks like, what differentiated assistance looks like, is still being discussed. We'll know more details about that. And then AB 130, a legislation that passed over the summer, is going to specify a level 3. So we have differentiated assistance, and then there's the next level for districts that have been in differentiated assistance for multiple years. And the state board would still need to approve any of those measures. In 2023, state indicators will include status change and performance colors based on data from 21-22. I will say, with the exception of the college and career indicator. And the problem with the college and career indicator is it requires that 11th grade smarter balanced assessment. And so we know that in 2020, we didn't have any students, and those were the students who graduated. But we also know this year, this last spring, it was only partial. For the CDE's already said that they're probably not going to report out on the college and career indicator until 2024 in a significant way, because they won't have the smarter balance, which is a big intrinsic part of the college and career indicator, but they will report out on the individual pieces. Schools and LEAs will be identified for support using the 21-22 and 2023 data. Again, so those are all things that are going to improve. A couple comments have come in. So Dr. Owen's link for today's meeting, the same link for all the meetings in the series. Yeah, for the college, if you're talking about CTE, there's one link for both days. There's 2 days. Also a clarification. So the CDE says with regards to local indicators, that they must be reported as part of a non-consent item at a regularly scheduled public meeting for the local governing board in conjunction with the adoption of the LCAP. It just says report the results. So the results, I suppose, if you didn't share the entire narrative or the entire, that's actually a good clarification there. You may have shared and not included all of the narrative that's going to be posted on the board. You may have summarized for the purposes of expedience, particularly if you're presenting in conjunction with the LCAP and the budget, which would have been a really long meeting. So thank you for that clarification. But yeah, it still would have needed, your local indicators would have needed to gone in some capacity. So here's a quick timeline provided by our friend. Sorry about the distortion for Fresno County Superintendent of Schools. So what you can expect moving forward. So fall, we know what last fall's produced, but so for fall 2022, the state indicators for those that are available will provide status only. And the local indicator will be reported. The status only won't apply to the college and career indicators for the reasons I stated, that we won't have sufficient smarter balance because it wasn't uniformly administered to 11th graders who will be in the 2022 graduating class. And then in 2023 is when you'll see that consistency ticked back up again. Student growth model data. So I won't spend too much time on this. We've been pushing it out there. But I just want to note, the growth model data is out there. The available growth data that's now been, there's individual student growth that was available in TOMS. And then the aggregate growth scores were released just at the end of last month. And there's a bunch of resources, and I highly recommend you do this. Let me just give my little warning. It's it's nice. They kind of released it, and the CDE was very nice about releasing the data without making a big public announcement about it. However, that data is just going to sit out there, and at some point, somebody's likely to pick it up and look at it. And they may ask questions. You may get questions from parents. You may get questions from advocacy groups. So it's good to understand it and what it means, and be able to put it in context. And so if you go to the CDE growth model page, you'll find they have a nice FAQ there, the video that I've taken a screen cap of, a flyer, and various things. So you just may want to become familiar with it. And then we won't actually see the growth data released in a meaningful way on the dashboard for a long time. So the soonest available will be 2024, because for the methodology to work, you actually need 3 consecutive years of data. And we didn't have any consistent data. So if you administered the CASP last year in your district, you won't be expected. It would not appear in any of the growth model data. So it is going to be a few years, but I guess maybe I'm just feeling, I'm always a little paranoid. I worked in a district where there was a lot of data could be used as a cudgel. So, I just want to make sure that everybody's familiar with it. And to that end, I am proposing this. I've got at least one LEA who I know has actually done a visualization with their data. I'm proposing to do a DAAN office hours around the student growth model. And if you have done any kind of visualization, or if you used it in any way, please let me know, because I would love to have you on board. Like I said, I know one district that's already done a visualization and shared it with their principals, shared it with their cabinet, and had discussions around it. Again, it's not necessarily data that you're going to make is actionable in any way, but it's interesting and it's helpful to understand it, and it certainly sheds a new light. And I do have a visualization that our colleagues in San Bernardino put together, and they were kind enough to throw in our district level data so we can play with that, just so you can see it. Shouldn't be a gotcha, but just so you can kind of see how it shakes out and to understand it better. And I will strive to get a representative from the CDE to join us for that. But I'd like to do that in the next couple of weeks while it's still fresh in everybody's mind. So look for an invite, but if you do have, if you've worked with that model, the data in any way, please let me know if you'd like to participate, and we'd like to have you join us and just share how you've used it. Again, it'd be kind of a informational sharing for people, so we could learn best practices from our colleagues. I did see the question in there about 130. I'll get to it in one more slide, I think. So Melanie, thank you for dropping that in. So this is just one thing, and because you're in DAAN and I've sent this out, I just wanted to give you an update, because earlier this summer, AB 104 brought about some changes to grade change request forms, or grade change requests, and the districts had a real short timeline. Just so you know, the AB 167, which was that omnibus education bill that was signed by Governor Newsom in the middle of September, it included an extension until October 1st for any grade change request that a parent or family educational rights holder submitted to change a letter grade to a pass, no pass on a transcript, right? And it was only for the 2021 grades. That's important to know. This isn't indefinite. It was only for the 2020-21. And the idea was, it was kind of hold harmless for kids who were impacted and their grades were impacted, so that they wouldn't, have to suffer significant consequences after, all the disruption in their lives, that they could change a grade to a pass. And the Cal State signed off on it, UCs, and a number of private schools said that they would accept those. So it was very short turnaround. It happened in August, and a lot of parents probably didn't find out. So they modified the extension to last Friday, October 1st. So that's behind us. But just so you know, and this is really in your interest for kids, you may extend that deadline longer based on your local needs. And I would just consider this. If you had kids who were freshmen last year, and they weren't thinking about college, they weren't really giving any thought whatsoever to anything, and suddenly they wake up 3 years from now and they go, man, my grades were bad. Now, granted, they're not going to look at the 9th grade grades in a lot of places, but wouldn't it be nice if they could go back and submit that pass, no pass to kind of rectify the implications? That's the idea. So you don't have to extend beyond October 1st, but you can, just so you know that. And if maybe you do some data analysis and you find that there was some inequities in your grading practices, and a lot of kids probably receive low grades, you do have the option of opening this up, and potentially through the class of 2024, you could offer grade change requests for those students. Again, it's the year 2020-21. Joel asks, who's the contact person for CAS BLA math questions at LACOE? Stephen is the new guy to go to for those specific questions, so put him on the spot. Stephen Bartlett, who's our new LACOE um, assessment coordinator. So thanks, Stephen. Okay, so AB 130, there are multiple things that came up in AB 130, but this is the one I wanted to share. So there is a change in the section 122 related to differentiated assistance. And what the state board and the legislation was looking for in the absence of a dashboard was just some kind of consistent criteria by which they could work with LEAs who are identified for differentiated assistance. So I took a screen cap here. You can see there's a bunch of things thrown in: local assessments administered last year, whichever assessments, local indicator data from last year at a minimum, school climate surveys, teacher assignment information, course access data. So just know that this is being cleaned up right now. I'm actually on a state working group, and we're trying to define the specifics of what this means. And we will send, if you're a district that's in differentiated assistance and a few charter schools identified for differentiated assistance, within the next month or so, you'll probably be hearing from the county as to what would be, the what and the where you can find this data. So an LEA would need to gather all this data. And I can tell you from our group, we're trying to make it as frictionless as possible. It's already data for like the local indicator data that you should have, right? So just make sure, be on the lookout for that and know that it needs to be collected and analyzed. And then the how, as far as how the consultation with the county office, that also will be defined and further clarified. But don't feel, you need to go out and start collecting this data on your own right now. Very quick CalPad update because we're way over. So CalPads has shifted. If you're participating in this, or you want to send somebody, we used to get Brandy Harkey from the CDE on our own for our own meetings, and we were so successful at that they said, hey, we should take the show to everybody across the state. So we're the victim of our own success. So instead of getting to her on our own, we actually are now part of a southern region, the Southern A region, and the CDE is conducting these meetings. They're 2-hour meetings held quarterly starting in November. And what we're doing with our LACOE CalPads meeting, we're tacking on to the end. So we're going to pop over from their meeting to ours, and we can time it. If they get done early or they get done late, we'll adjust accordingly. And so we're going to immediately follow, and we have a separate registration for our meetings, but we'll continue to include breakouts with SIS vendors. So if you're LEA CalPads coordinator, just make sure you know about this and the distinction there, or if you want to make sure your CalPads people attend these. Just a couple of things. I sent this out earlier, but the CalPads, the post-process redesign, which will ultimately speed things up, was pushed given all the slowdown around LPAC and initial LPAC and SSID. So that's been pushed until the fall 2 submissions, which is in March. So they're really trying to find a window to do this. It's basically an update to the overall system, which will make things faster, but they're trying to avoid having an impact on CASP and LPAC testing. So just be aware of that. Just in coming up at the end of this week, we've got, actually tomorrow is Census Day. It's a big day, important day. The initial certification deadline is December 18th. And your final certification, so the amendment window through January 28th. And just so you know why this is important for accountability purposes, if you're new to this role, it is used to generate your first principal apportionment. So that includes both your unduplicated pupil count for supplemental concentration grant funding, as well as your any additional funds or your base grant for LCFF. It also has some important requirements and some changes this year in terms of your unduplicated pupil count. It's important to know, last year, if you recall, there was an extension till December for collecting free and reduced price meal information, as well as English learner information. Now note that this is all being pulled back into a more consistent format. So a big challenge this year, a lot of districts, are using that seamless summer option, which allows free and reduced lunch is afforded to every student, so you didn't have to collect information. So hopefully you had a plan in place, and I just want to clarify, to gather the necessary documentation, because unless a student is directly certified for free and reduced price meal, you have to have the paperwork to back it up, either the free and reduced price lunch application from NSLP or the alternative assessment, the alternative income forms. And you do have until October 31st to get those in. You don't have to have those by tomorrow, but those are hard to get, especially if kids are, quarantined or, I think it's hard to convey the importance of it to students, because they're going, why would I fill those out? We're getting one for free anyway. So appreciate the challenge and just make sure it's on your list, because it does end up needing a lot of money for your unduplicated pupil count. English learners, that is on the next slide, but just there's not a lot you can do. We already kind of we already talked about the challenges faced with the initial LPAC, and the deadline of 30 days is maybe more significant in some ways, but if the students aren't thoroughly tested, if they haven't completed all elements of the test on or before tomorrow, you may potentially lose them for your LCFF count for English learners. But if you have any low-hanging fruit, if you have a student who just needs one more section, then definitely take a scan to make sure you capture all those. Okay, so we're way over. I'm just going to scan the questions here. Seeing none, I'm going to assume that we have hit the end of we've hit that threshold, right? Your ability to take information is going like this. I'm simultaneously going like that, adding more information too quickly. So please do this. Hillary, will you please drop into the chat? We have just this request of you to complete this very brief evaluation form and tell us what you need from us. And so Heidi, will you just email me? And I'm not sure exactly which one you mean, but I will make sure you get that. And then Robin, with regards to the PFT, I did mention that there were pending things. We actually have a colleague here at LACOE who's on a state committee who's looking at the physical fitness test. No news yet. There were some expectations that after the Governor Newsom was able to take over his seat, to re-win his seat, I don't know what to call it, that there would be some announcements. We haven't heard anything yet, but stay tuned and we will keep you up to date. So please fill out this brief form that Hillary just dropped in the survey. Yes, so Betsy, definitely, if you have the seamless summer and it's still in place, you need your free and reduced lunch application or an alternate assessment form on file to ensure you have to have that for your unduplicated pupil count. That you have to have the documentation. So it's really critical that you get some measure for all your students. A lot of your students hopefully will be directly certified. Those you don't have to worry about getting forms from. Direct certification, if the students are on any kind of public assistance, then they will automatically appear. The county downloads the county social services, all that information is downloaded on CalPads, you'll know those, but it's the kids who qualify who don't receive those. And I will stay on for a few minutes to answer any questions. Otherwise, just a couple upcoming, for any of you, here's our links for upcoming LACOE trainings that are in the thing, our LPAC new coordinator training, CAS new coordinator training coming up. Also that using data effectively for CTU, which we just talked about. And two big conferences, the California Assessment Conference coming up later this month, primarily designed for classroom teachers, but you may find some interest there. And then the CERA, the California Educational Research Association. This is actually in person in Anaheim. So we can't go, but if you can go, if you're still allowed to travel, this will be a good one. So those two things. And then finally, just fill that out. And I appreciate your patience. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Sorry to have to rush everything through at the very end. If you do have questions that didn't get answered, we will answer them in the follow-up Q&A. But I thank you for your time. And we look for our next upcoming office hours talking about student growth model. I think that's the next time we might run into you.